Great. I definitely apologize for that, you all. We've been having a little bit of technical issues with Zoom, but we are ready to get started. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. Welcome to the first webinar in the 7-part series entitled Understanding Trauma, Unpacking a Culturally Responsive Approach to Serving Sexual Assault Survivors During COVID-19. My name is Erica Blackwood, and I am the SADI Specialist for NC CASA. This series will provide training and practical applications for supporting survivors of sexual violence in the midst of dual pandemics of COVID-19 and the civil unrest. It will focus on helping advocates create accessible, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed approaches to the unique needs of survivors that are being faced during this time. Included in this webinar is going to be some foundational information about the intersections of trauma, sexual violence, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, and racialized trauma. Before we get started with today's webinar, Grounding in Humanity, just a few key housekeeping items. All webinars will be recorded and available on NC CASA's YouTube page afterwards. Certificates will be available at the end of the series, and our training specialist, Gabriella Nyman, will be handling the distribution of that. If you have any questions, you can use your chat box to ask questions privately to panelists or use the Q&A feature. For now, please make sure you have all your responses set to all panelists and attendees. And now I introduce to you the host of today's webinar, Resource Sharing Project Technical Assistance Provider, Woman of Color Leadership, and NC CASA staff member, Tracy Wright.
Hello, how y'all doing? Show me some love in the chat. There we go. I can only facilitate if you participate. I'm doing good, Kristen. Thanks for asking. Yeah, folks are doing good. Yeah, thank you. Hey, right back at you. Yes, I am Tracy Wright, and I work at the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault. My roles there are to provide TA and training and ongoing capacity building to 17 different states. I was trying to count states and anti-sexual assault coalitions. To help them build their capacity around responding to sexual violence. In addition, I also help with NC CASA's campus work, as well as am the lead project director for NC CASA's youth work. And the reason why I share all of those responsibilities is because I will attempt to bring all of those roles and responsibilities into our space because they are part of my lived experience. So I'm going to stop share for just 1 second to get it right so I can see it. Hold on 1 second. Okay, I got it. Thank you for your patience. There we go. And so I am really excited that the membership team put together this trauma-informed series over the course of 7 sessions, because I believe that we are in a time where how we think about trauma is going to be imperative as we think about our new normals in this work. And so I think that throughout our time together, my hope is that we are grounded in some frameworks, as well as some philosophies, as well as some approaches to how NC CASA frames its work. And what I appreciate about this space is that I also think that it has a tenet of forecasting about the conversations that our communities are going to need from us, the services that survivors are going to need in the coming months. So I appreciate the forecasting that the membership team thought about in putting this together. And it's my hope that some of the pieces and groundings and philosophies and frameworks from our time together are tenets that you'll be able to carry with you throughout the remaining of the series. To Erica's point, I think it's imperative that we note that we are in the midst of dual pandemics. We are in the midst of a global health pandemic. We have come to know it as COVID-19, coupled with being a part of the civil unrest and this country's 400 plus year pre-existing condition of racism and oppression. And it's interesting that we are living in the times as such when we are thinking and talking about ground, right? To be grounded, which is the purpose of our time together, is for us all to have the same understanding of how we should potentially think about our services, the impact of trauma, and next steps, right? And to ground means, when you look at it from a verb, means to place on a foundation, fix firmly, settle, and establish. And so we hope that this time we'll be talking about some frames and some thought processes that will ground you as you move through the trauma series. And the way we're going to break down this conversation is into three parts. What I like to call BC, which is before COVID, DC, which is during COVID, and AD, which is after disease. And I think one of the first questions I want to ask folks as we ground and move through these three phases together is for us to really think about, who were you 165 days ago? Why would you ask that, Tracy? 165 days ago, from today being August the 25th, 165 days back is March 13th, which is the day in which we started to move into quarantine and really started to think about the impact of this global pandemic that had now made it to the United States of America. And it's fascinating, first of all, to know that it's been 165 days. But what is also extremely critical is for us to think about, who were we 165 days ago? And so I would definitely love for you all to drop your thoughts, your ideas about, who were you 165 days ago? Definitely more carefree, more of a risk taker. Absolutely. Less anxious, a mess. Outgoing. Yeah, less anxious. Absolutely. We all were, Olivia, less worried about others around me. Yeah. Oh, I miss hugs too. Oh, my goodness. I miss hugs. I'm glad that we have a hugger with us today. I miss hugger. I miss hugs. Yes. Um, yep. More sane. I was on the go all the time. This pandemic has really made me slow down and enjoy time. Same. I felt like I could chase my dreams more too. Yeah, more connected. Um, Sheila, I agree. Like, I feel more grounded too. I think about, I've been at the coalition for almost 16 years, and this is the longest I've ever been settled in my apartment, not traveling for 165 days. This is probably the longest I've ever been, not been on an airplane. Mm-hmm. Love to travel and see the grandkids. Mm-hmm. Yep. The isolation about not being able to see people, and then how to reconnect and hold those connections with folks virtually, which can be emotionally exhausting. hmm hmm Clarity. Yeah. Way less frustrated with the world. Absolutely, Abby. I hear you on that. I am cooking now, guys. I got plants. I'm so responsible. I'm so adulting over here, like things that I never thought that I would be able to do or never even created the space to be able to do. Absolutely. Oh, pets. I've thought about one. I thought about a fish named Badu. Yes, I thought about a fish. Baby steps. Started a garden. Yeah, I'm going to get. Oh, I was a business owner. Yeah, we have to think about all of these things and how life just really changed, um, 165 days ago. And, we just have to acknowledge that the catalyst really was COVID and the underpinning of racism and oppression and how we think about that. hmm Breath has become so vital, right? Taking them in, hmm overwhelmed, home life, work life, and social life, right? Just trying to figure out which one to do. And now they're all in the same place, essentially, for many of us. Absolutely. Thank you for that vulnerability and that lived experience about who we were, right? Who we were, how we thought about life, how we thought about our work. And, we would be remiss if we didn't think about how COVID has led us to really explore and take a deeper dive into thinking about social justice. And so these two words apart, social means relating to, devoted to, living or disposed to living in companionship with others or in a community rather than isolation. And justice means righteous, moral rightness, administering deserved punishment or reward, and a lot of times it's also connected when we think about laws, judicial proceedings. And so, the way that we really started, we were thinking about this in before COVID. And I think now we are living and existing in it to really think about social justice in a really different way and really operating from this understanding that social justice is the principle that all members of society have equal rights and opportunity. And when we're thinking about social justice, we're also thinking about a lot of the language that's connected to a lot of those conversations. And so we are unpacking racism and oppression. We are thinking about sexual violence. We're thinking about equity and equality, education, politics, capitalism, low wages, restorative justice, and just relationships within community. So we're thinking about a lot of different things when we're thinking about social justice. And so all these pieces of language lead us to have these deeper conversations and to think about these things in a really intimate way. And I think it's imperative that we note that these things are also connected to trauma. Connected to trauma by way of historical trauma, lived experience, the trauma that comes along when you are impacted by these ills of the world, and how those things can impact our services to survivors. And, one of the things that I think that we have to hold up is understanding within the construct of thinking about social justice and all these varied intersections, and we're thinking about trauma, that also lends us to spend a little time to think about racial equity, and how those things can impact how you provide services, who you provide services to, and the impact of having to live and experience in this skin, in this country, the effects of racial inequity. And so when we're talking about racial equity, we're thinking about the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted, right? When we start thinking about stats, how one fares. When we use the term, we're also thinking about racial equity as a part of racial justice and social justice. And thus, we must also include and address the root causes of inequities, not just their manifestations. And how this intersects with our work is we understand and work from this framework where we know that the root causes of all forms of gender-based violence in this country and abroad is tied to racism and oppression. And I think we are at this space right now where we cannot do the work to end sexual violence in a silo. It has to be a duality of works, multiple dualities, to, to speak the truth, of how we approach, how we meet folks at the intersection of their lived experiences, their personal experiences, as well as the systemic impact of racism and oppression, and how it happens and impacts lived experience, as well as a lot of folks' reality. And when you're talking about the reality, I'm going to share the story. I shared this morning and I liked it, and so I decided, I was like, oh, let's bring it here to really get a clear picture of how racial inequality happens. I'll tell a story. I'll tell it to neighborhoods. In one neighborhood is a family of four, the Smiths. The Smiths neighborhood is filled with abandoned homes, poor schools, and over-policing. Most of their neighborhoods, including themselves, their neighbors, are people of color. In an adjoining neighborhood is a family of three, the Joneses. The Joneses neighborhood has plenty of fresh food markets, a robust bus system, parks, health centers, and good schools. Families flock there because all of these services translate to economic opportunity and good health. Most of the families who live in this neighborhood, including the Joneses, are white. The racial composition of their neighborhoods didn't just happen on their own. And I think those are contexts of what we're living and experiencing to now, when we're thinking about housing inequality, the cost of living wages. All of those things just didn't happen, especially when you start thinking about neighborhood makeup, who lives in which neighborhood, and whether that neighborhood has decent housing, good schools, and well-paying jobs is determined by multiple institutional policies and practices. Whether intentionally or not, these policies and practices have often discriminated by race, which is why we see so much difference in life outcomes based on race. And that is critical, and it helps us really be grounded in where we can see where the inequalities are and where they lie. because this next statement about like how in some communities across in North Carolina, there's a 10-year life expectancy difference between zip codes where residents are predominantly white and zip codes where residents are predominantly people of color. And this is what we call, in reality, structural racial inequality. And so these inequalities exist in our communities. These are the things that when we are thinking about safe homes and we're thinking about accessibility, when we're thinking about food insecurities, these are the things, and these are also the things that we know that survivors need in order to thrive. I think it's important for us to have this perspective, especially as we think about service provision as we move forward. Service provision, especially when we think about how racial inequality does have a trauma lens attached to it. And how do we think about these things when we are rethinking and reshaping our services, especially in a post-COVID atmosphere, right? Questions, thoughts, any energy in the chat? Nice. And Gabriella will let me know. So we kind of explored a little bit about who we were in BC before COVID. Now, the interesting conversation that I want to ask folks to kind of chime in and share their lived experience as well is, who are you today during DC, during COVID? I speak kinder to myself, exhausted all the time, right? Because it's a different level of exactly overprotection, overprotective, more aware of my mental health needs, more aware of the needs of those I live with. Yeah, use the pandemic to express prejudices. Yep, yeah. And I am there with you, Kristen. We have become like really centered and think about um, how are we thinking about how do we reach the folks that don't know we exist? How do we reach folks who really need us, but we haven't figured out how to reach them? Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Able to see more of my introvert self and able to offer others more of me in a different way. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Way more content with quiet and being home alone. Mm-hmm. And I think the reality of the hardest part for all of us to understand is that we are in real, we're all in collective active trauma, right? All of us at the same time are trying to figure out how to survive a pandemic. I think, I still have to speak really kindly to myself about what I say to myself about my anxiety. I have to take a millisecond just to calm down. I have to speak kindly to myself when there are times when I really cannot sleep well. Or I think early on, and I'm starting to experience a little bit more of it now, is I am having a little bit more vivid dreams sometimes a little nightmarish. Um, Howard the Duck was in one of my dreams. Not sure how that happened at all, but these really, really vivid nightmares. And I read this article about, hey, your body is trying to respond and cope and manage when things outside of your door, Tracy, are really chaotic. And so, I just try to keep those things in perspective. And I think that is um, a key point that I'm certain that you all will explore throughout your time, because we're all in active trauma together, trying to figure out what's next when next changes every single day. Yeah. I'm way more attentive to my own emotional well-being. I use painting for therapy, so I've been painting a lot. Absolutely. And I think the time where we are all just in collective community is extremely helpful too. Just sharing our vulnerabilities and our fears and our angst, and I think we just get so much permission and power when folks are like, I am tired. It is hard to be productive today. It is hard to stay focused today. And I might need to take more breaks than I usually take, right? And so I think that because we're existing this together, I hope that one of the things that emerges on the other side of this is that we hold on to a lot of that grace and that permission, not only that we gave to others, but most importantly, that we gave to ourselves, as we try to figure out how to navigate all of these uncertainties and all these anxieties that are real. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, you all are very in tune with who you are today. Y'all didn't need me today. Y'all could have started the series, but I'm glad you all are here, and I appreciate the community and the vulnerability and speaking truth to times are really hard right now, and we're all trying to figure it out together and exploring all of the possibilities um, that we can, how we can, when we can. Yeah. And just like, the connectedness to, um, you know, when we're talking about social justice, the other pieces of language that were connected to talking about social justice, we now have a very, very lot of different language that we're also thinking about. Toilet paper, like, yeah, never knew it was that important, but it really is. Zoom and stay at home and contactless and school and what school looks like. Grief and confinement and masks and parades and heroes and technology and accessibility and food insecurity. And we are TikToking like it is nobody's business. Um, I saw this quote on Instagram the other day. It said, the revolution and liberation won't be televised, but it might be TikTok. And I kind of believe that it may be. I think we're also seeing a new emergence of young people thrive as leaders, as advocates and social change agents. And we're talking a whole lot about pre-existing conditions and social distancing. And I think one interesting way for us to kind of explore social distancing in the construct of when we're talking about equality and social justice, I think it's imperative to understand that in many ways, and for many of us, social distancing really doesn't feel particularly new. Our society has actually been built upon and defined by social distancing for many years. It's called systemic and institutional racism, from redlining, gentrification, poll tax to voter purges, segregation in schools, college debt. We have been kept away from one another for decades, if not centuries. And I thought that was so pivotal when we think about the ills and the the really hard things that each of us are trying to fight each day, right? Um, it, when I think about social distancing in this way, and I think about this work, and I think about the efforts and the way in which you all work with survivors, I'm like, we have been saying this for a really long time. And I think, like, in comparison, when you think about social distancing, you're thinking about race and social justice, there's an old adage that says that's fitting for a time like this is when white folks catch a cold, Black folks get pneumonia. And this fundamental reality, when you start thinking about existing inequalities, especially during a time of crisis, is seen in even sharper focus during a global pandemic. Hence, that is how we enter into our approach in thinking about the dual pandemics, right? This is also another interesting thing I read about. This lends itself into pre-existing conditions. To be clear, a pre-existing condition is often defined as a medical illness or injury you had before you enrolled in a new health care plan. It can include asthma, diabetes, cancer, kidney disease, and even obesity. But the true pre-existing condition, which fuels the high death tolls of communities of color and marginalized communities from COVID, is something less visible, but just as real, which is structural violence. And structural violence is described how social institutions systematically harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs and reaching their fullest potential. And we know those things are connected to social structures, economics, politics, legal, religious, cultural, and all of these things are the order of the world. And so I think that when we are talking about trauma, whether that be lived, um, people's personal experiences, historical trauma, the internal, external society norms that most definitely can perpetuate trauma, we have to hold all of those things in context when we're thinking about services to survivors. And I think because of the active trauma, the historical trauma, and these inequities and pre-existing conditions and the impact of social distancing and isolation, I think we're really going to have to think about trauma and how we provide trauma-informed services to survivors, taking into account all of those tenets of lived experiences connected to structural racism and structural violence. And so in understanding structural violence, it turns violence when they cause injury to people by lowering the actual degree to which someone is able to meet their needs below that which would otherwise be possible. And for certain, I think we all can agree that we are experiencing that on a deeper level. It is extremely heightened when we think about how we are living and existing in COVID. Pre-existing conditions, yeah. And here's a little chart that I made when I started kind of framing these conversations, because I think that our work, the work to end all forms of sexual violence and gender-based violence, I think we are the people who have been prepared for a time like this and the response thereafter. I think there are a lot of different parallels when you think about COVID and when you think about sexual violence. There are a lot of folks who still believe that sexual violence does not impact their community. We can also say that there are a lot of pieces of narrative that don't believe that COVID is real, nor does it impact their communities. We've been there. You all have been beacons of hope in your communities, really lifting up survivors, lifting up prevention efforts, organizing effort, service delivery, because you all do know that sexual violence exists. Um, and so I think that is an interesting parallel when we do this kind of where we are and how COVID responses and and our response in our work, um, how those things are parallel. We understand that sexual violence comes with trauma. We also know that we are in active trauma, trying to figure out how to navigate during a pandemic. Although they have become extremely political, wearing a mask to me is the equivalent of how we think about risk and protective factors when we're thinking about how to disrupt sexual violence in our communities. I believe that advocates and organizers, allies, stakeholders, survivors have been essential workers before, long before it became a thing that sat on our palate. I believe that fully. I think where both COVID and sexual violence do meet is we know that in both um, instances, it impacts the most underserved and marginalized. That is true when we're thinking about sexual violence. That is also true when we're thinking about COVID. We think of sexual violence as an epidemic. COVID is a pandemic. And at the end of the day, I believe and I am hopeful because of the essential workers, because the essential workers who are advocates, the essential workers who are working to respond to both PTSD and active trauma. I am hopeful because I am certain. I know I know this work. I know the folks who do it. I know you all. I know how hard you all work. I can honestly say I know that we are in this together. And so I believe that our work has the potential to lead us in a way um, now as we are all experiencing COVID together. And I think in AD, which is, how we think about who we are after disease. And I think having a conversation about all of the intersectionalities and trauma and racism and oppression, the parallels between COVID and pre-existing conditions and social distancing. It has me to also ask you all, who do you want to be after disease, AD, right? So we've moved through before COVID, we've moved through during COVID, and now we're sitting nicely at who do you want to be? Because I also believe that there are some pieces of us that we will hold on to as we all try to collectively build a new normal. So, who do you want to be? What are you going to hold on to once we are co creating this new normal together? Mm-hmm. Continue to use mindfulness and balance with the new normal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A little bit of both. BC and DC, aware of myself, but more carefree. Mm-hmm. Strong, letting the lessons we learn to move forward, but not to make me scared of the new normal. Absolutely. I'm still going to be giving a lot of hugs. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Hmm. I'm just going to be on, yeah, to be grateful for the little things. I think I'm definitely going to hold on to um, my gratitude practice in the morning, which I do every 24 hours, which is to write down 3 things I was grateful for the day before so that I can always remember that there's so much to be grateful for, even when there's such an abundance of super hard stuff. Yeah. Be able to remember things realized and knowing what is most important. Absolutely. To take a little bit of time, um, just to be reflective. I think that we all understand self care in a very different way than we have ever before. We've done a lot of, well, I'll use I statements. Um, I have given a lot of lip service to self care, and now I know it in a very, very different way. Um, and that different way has saved my life and made me more aware of myself and others around me. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Yep, definitely to be more grateful and compassionate about what others may be experiencing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Exactly. Be more grateful to, you know, grocery workers, essential workers, which, even that kind of frame to think about that is we use that like essential workers. Oh, we're so, but let's also understand, because I also believe a couple things can exist at one time. We also have to understand that some folks probably would have rather not been at work, but because they do have to take care of their families, because jobs are hard to find and unemployment is so high that these workers, right, essential workers, sacrifice for our well-being. And so, and I think, I think we got to pay them more, right? Let's really talk about that. Absolutely. Migrant farmers, LPN, and nursing homes, like, absolutely, like, yeah, deserve a living wage. That's what I want to see um, in AD. I really hope that that we'll collectively, and I believe we will. I think we understand things differently, and I think we are taking care of ourselves. And I appreciate you all as advocates and healers and organizers in your community for really taking care of yourself at a time like this, because I honestly believe that survivors in our communities are going to need us in a very different way. And we have to be well before we can take care of others. hmm hmm We do. hmm Y'all all right with me? Y'all is filling this chat up. I appreciate this. Like, yeah, like you all are going to have such a really enlightening time by way of this trauma series. I hope I'm able to join you for some of those and moving forward too. Yeah. Major shout out to the membership team, Deanna, Erica, Leah. Um, we wouldn't be here without Gabriella. Like, I'm just really grateful for them for having that insight for us to have these conversations and thinking about trauma and who we want to be and how taxing and hard this time has been. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was never normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. Oh, yes, Janie. I'm going to give you what I just came off of 33 sessions with young people. They didn't fill the chat with all those words. They just filled the comment section with these arrows that go up, which, if you're training young people, it just means, yeah, I agree with what was said. Yes. 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 Oh my God, a new opportunity. A new opportunity. That's exactly what we have. A new opportunity, newness. Yeah. Janie done read my presentation. She's talking about humanity already. We're going to get there. And I think we all have these beautiful ideas and we have the time to co-create what we want to be and how, yeah, normal wasn't normal, right? And normal may not have been working for us well, right? Yeah, fresh awareness. Reset. Yeah. And I think as we start thinking about who we want to be and these conversations around racial equity, I want to lift up that racial equity is both an outcome and a process. An outcome, we achieve racial equity when race no longer determines one's socioeconomic outcomes, when everybody has what they need to thrive, no matter what they live, where they live. As a process, we apply racial equity when those most impacted by structural racial inequity are meaningful, involved in the creation and implementation of the policies and practices that will impact their lives. And I think that is extremely key when we think about the services that we create, the services that we offer, is how do we really involve folks' lived experiences and racial equity into those practices, and how we do that. Mm-hmm. And we achieve racial equity. People, including people of color, are owners and planners and decision makers in the systems that govern their lives. We acknowledge and account for past and current inequities. And I think this is the point where it gets lost a whole lot. I think this is sometimes a barrier, especially when we have to acknowledge and account for the past and even some current inequities. And I think that is critical as we strive to get to equity. We have to acknowledge the harm, the institutional oppression and racism, systemic xenophobia, all of those things, we have to acknowledge those things in order for us to move forward. And oftentimes the conversation gets lost because people want to jump over that and then start talking about how can we come up with a solution. And I think that's really important as you all think about and have those conversations in the trauma series about historical trauma and its impact, right? So we have to acknowledge and account for past and current inequities and provide all people, particularly those most impacted by racial inequities, the infrastructure that they need to thrive. And this is also a hard one, is to help and for folks to know that when everybody benefits from a more just and equitable system, it's not just one person, but we all have a better quality and container for life when everybody has a more just and equitable system. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, these conversations really are leading us to think about humanity, right? Humanity. That is where, that truly for me is the intersection of COVID, trauma, our lives, the future we hope for is really to be grounded in humanity, and understanding that, you know, the human race, the humankind, the quality, the condition of being human, um, kindness, benevolence, empathy, goodwill, compassion, generosity, goodness, kindness, friendship, people feeling sympathy, charity. That is how we are now connecting. That humanity is the fabric to this new garment that I think that we are all sitting in, and who we want to be, how we want to approach our work, and moving forward after disease. This summer, I want to skip that one. This summer, I had some really amazing, Christy at our office had some really amazing interns who really grounded us in this thought process about love. Because I do think that when we're talking about humanity, it lends itself to love. Now, this is the traditional definition of what we would know love to be, right? A profoundly tender, passionate affection for another person, a warm personal attachment or deep affection as a friend, a parent, a child, related words being tenderness, warmth, and fondness. And these interns, who were absolutely amazing, really reshifted and helped me think about what love is. And their frame in which they presented it, not only to myself, but to the young people that we were having conversations with, was really about love, all about love. And it was grounded in the works of Bell Hooks. And in All About Love, Bell Hooks lets us know that love is not a feeling, it's actually an action. And according to Bell Hooks, as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another one's spiritual growth. And to love, you have to surrender and trust another person. And love cannot coexist with abuse. And I think for me, and here's the thing, y'all, I completely lifted this from some college students who gave this to me as a gift. I actually think I'm going to end every presentation in talking about love because I was so profoundly shifted, and my thought process about love and humanity and equity and who are we going to be on the other side of this and trauma-informed services, it all led me back to love and love in this regard, because for me, it like the definition that I had about love before exploring it this way was completely different. And another thing that I love that was said, that was like love and social justice. Love is the reason we fight for social justice. Social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. When we practice social justice, we are following Bell Hooks' definition and investing in the well-being and growth of ourselves and others. This is love. Our social justice efforts and organizing should reflect the qualities of love as we care for one another in this movement. Oh my God, it takes my breath away every time I think about it, every time I hear it, every time I envision love is social justice and understand why we do the work that we do, how we are here, how we are moving. Like, this just makes me hopeful about what is next. Love. That's where we end up landing when we start talking about being grounded in humanity and thinking about trauma-informed services and who we're going to be in the services that survivors are going to need in moving forward. And this just really goes along with one of the statements that was in the chat. It was a poem. This guy, Jericho Brown, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, and he wrote this poem called The Tradition. And I love this quote when he talks about what it is. And I think this is really where I hope we can kind of move into some questions and some thoughts and some processes about this. We are all inventing our lives, he said. Invention means that we improvise. Just because we are told a certain way of living is right or wrong that doesn't mean that we don't have the opportunity to test what is really best for us and our people and our families. And I think, what if all of these dual pandemics are our defining moment in time for us to reimagine, for us to stick this, stitch this garment, this new canvas, this reset that you all have spoke so profoundly about? Like, what if this is our defining moment to reimagine the hope and the love and the equity, right, with humanity, survivors, their needs, their lived experiences, as our focus, and us allowing love to lead the way. So my final question for you all, is, what do you need? We've envisioned, we've practiced love. Y'all been great. Uh-huh. What do you need? Yes, you can have this whole PowerPoint. Yes. What do you need? Mm-hmm. My coworkers. Mm-hmm. Encouragement during this time. Mm-hmm. Understanding, support, and encouragement, and kindness. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. More conversations like this. I think these are all things that I am certain you all are going to carry with you all throughout your series. Um, I think that we are in this together, and we will figure out how to do it and comfort and serenity. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to do something. I'm going to ask folks to do something. This wasn't on my agenda, but I am actively listening to you all, even though we are in a virtual space. I believe in following the truth, right? Um, and so, what I'm going to ask folks to do in the chat is to write an affirmation for yourself. And the reason why I'm going to ask you to do that is because you could be writing it for yourself, but we never know who on the call or in this space may also need it too. So I will start off, and I will say to you all is you are worthy. You are worthy. Absolutely. You got this. You sure do. Mm-hmm. I am doing the absolute best I can. Say it louder for the people in the back. You are not broken. I believe in trust and have confidence in my ability. I do too, Lindsay. You belong here. Yeah. Know and appreciate your authentic self. Please bring it to the party. Your authentic self. I see you and I hear you. You are beautiful. Thank you, Carol. And you are too. You can handle your workload and your new challenges. Mm-hmm. And if you can't, speak kindly to yourself, because you're doing the best that you can. Put you first. Absolutely. Dwell in possibility. Mm-hmm. Oh, these hurt hands can heal better. Ah, I believe that. Oh, hold on. I see obstacles as an opportunity to grow. I'm enough and I'm doing the best that I can. My mantra: do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Yes, Janie, you've been dropping jewels all throughout my throughout our time. Like you really just been doing mic drops the whole time. You are appreciated. You are not alone. If at all you can do is crawl, start crawling. I got like I know, Janie, you got them. 1 minute at a time. Mm-hmm. 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 Uh-huh. Gabriella, you're gonna have to hold this chat. We have to record this chat. We're gonna send this chat to you as well too, because I think that we need affirmation and support. How we can get it, and words are so powerful. Yeah, happiness is my birthright, and I choose to be happy. Mm-hmm. I also say I don't have to RSVP to foolishness. I don't have to show up to that. I can choose if I want to go to that. Yep. And look what we were able to create. We were able to create an environment where we gave folks what they needed, which was affirmation and support, because we also acknowledge that times are really hard. And I thank you all so much for I appreciate you all because I know that you all actively listen to me, which I appreciate, which is a skill set I think that we have to also sit in and refine as we think about our new normal, active listening, to be able to sit and listen without building a rebuttal. Right, I have to stop myself. It is a new skill set of mine because usually I nod and I'm like, I know what I'm getting ready to say. But these days, I'm just sitting to listen actively so I can follow the truth. Um, and I think that as we explore love and humanity and think about trauma, I hope that we are all um, accountable, right? Love and accountability actually go together, right? They go together. And to hold someone accountable, in my regard, is the greatest form of love. And I just thank you all so much for an amazing afternoon. I am done, and you all will get a copy of the presentation, which has a couple of things that I read to kind of get ready for this space and to enter into it for you all so you all can read it too. Thank you all so much. Everybody, please take care and stay safe. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to